The first thing I noticed was that Hannah was carrying only one suitcase. The second was that she was wearing the same wedding ring she had proudly shown me 3 weeks earlier, but her husband was nowhere beside her. She stood on my porch in Nashville, Tennessee, beneath a cold gray sky, looking less like a newlywed returning from a honeymoon and more like someone who had traveled 1,000 miles just to find one safe place left in the world. When she finally looked into my eyes, her lips trembled, and she whispered my name, Nathan. I knew immediately that whatever had happened, she had not come home because the honeymoon was over. She had come home because something inside her had broken. If you believe that kindness can reach people when nothing else can, that forgiveness can rebuild what pride destroys, and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us that compassion still matters. Hannah and I had been best friends since college. She was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday, brought soup when someone was sick, and could make a stranger feel like an old friend within minutes. I was quieter, more cautious, and usually the person she called when life stopped making sense. When she met Caleb, I was genuinely happy for her. He seemed confident and thoughtful, and Hannah believed she had finally found the person she would grow old with. But a few months before their wedding, I noticed something changing. Hannah stopped laughing as easily. She began apologizing for little things that were never her fault, and whenever Caleb entered a room, she seemed to measure every word before speaking. I tried to ask if she was all right, but she always smiled and told me I was worrying too much. I respected her choice, even though a small part of me remained uneasy. Now she was standing in my doorway alone. I brought her inside, made coffee, and asked no questions. For nearly 20 minutes, she simply sat at my kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from her cup. Then she told me that on their second night in Charleston, Caleb had received a phone call from his older brother, Marcus. The call concerned a family business that had suddenly fallen into financial trouble. Caleb became consumed by it. He spent hours on his phone, made plans without Hannah, and eventually told her they needed to leave the next morning. But when Hannah asked what was happening, he admitted that he had known about the financial problems before their wedding and had deliberately kept them from her because he feared she would reconsider marrying him. That confession hurt her more than the business crisis itself. Hannah told me she had spent the entire night wondering how many other things Caleb had hidden. She remembered every time he had dismissed her questions, every promise he had made without explanation, and every moment when she had convinced herself that love meant being patient. The next morning, she told Caleb she could not continue the marriage until there was honesty between them. He became angry, not violent, but deeply defensive, insisting that he had been protecting her. Hannah finally understood that she had spent months protecting his feelings while slowly abandoning her own. She left the trip alone. But the hardest part was not leaving Caleb. It was admitting that she had married someone she did not truly know. For the next several weeks, Hannah stayed in my guest room. She barely touched her wedding photographs. Some mornings she woke convinced she had made the right decision. By evening, guilt would return and tell her she had failed at marriage before it had even begun. I watched my strongest friend struggle with shame, and I realized that sometimes people do not need someone to tell them what decision to make. They need someone willing to sit beside them while they learn how to trust themselves again. Then one rainy Saturday, Caleb came to my house. He did not demand to see Hannah. He stood on the porch holding a small cardboard box and asked if I would give it to her. Inside were the letters Hannah had written him during their engagement, along with her grandmother's old recipe book that she had accidentally left at his apartment. But beneath them was something unexpected, a handwritten letter from Caleb admitting that he had spent years believing he had to solve every problem alone. His father had taught him that needing help was weakness, so when the family business began collapsing, Caleb panicked. He hid the truth because he was terrified Hannah would see him differently. The letter did not excuse what he had done. But for the first time, Hannah saw that the man who had hurt her was also a deeply frightened human being who needed to take responsibility for his choices. She agreed to meet him, but not to return to the marriage. They spent months attending counseling separately and together. Hannah rebuilt her confidence. Caleb learned that honesty was not weakness and that protecting someone without giving them the truth was simply another form of control. Eventually, they made a decision that surprised even me. They did not rush back into being husband and wife. Instead, they started over as two people trying to understand whether trust could ever grow again. A year later, I received an invitation to a small ceremony at a lakeside church outside Nashville. Hannah and Caleb were renewing their vows, but this time there were no extravagant decorations, no grand promises, and no pretending that marriage would always be easy. They stood before their families and promised something much simpler: to tell the truth even when it was uncomfortable, to ask for help when they needed it, and to never confuse love with silence. After the ceremony, Hannah found me near the lake. She hugged me tightly and reminded me of the night she had arrived at my door with one suitcase and nowhere else to go. She said she had once believed coming home alone meant her marriage had failed. Now she understood that sometimes coming home is not failure at all. Sometimes it is the first brave step toward finding yourself again. If this story touched your heart, please support it with a like, share it with someone who believes people can change, and subscribe so these stories can continue reaching people who need a little hope. Before you go, leave a comment and tell me this: do you believe trust can truly be rebuilt after it has been broken? Your answer might give courage to someone quietly facing the same question. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the Tennessee hills, Hannah slipped her hand into mine and smiled. She had returned from her honeymoon alone, but she had not remained alone. She had found something more important than a perfect beginning. She had found the courage to choose honesty, the strength to forgive without forgetting, and the understanding that sometimes the people who love us most are not the ones who promise to fix our lives, but the ones who stay beside us while we learn to fix them ourselves.